You're listening to Bad Dog Agility, bringing you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jennifer, and this is episode 214. Today's podcast is brought to you by hititboard.com. Hititboard.com has the innovative training tools you need for agility. Having problems with the dog walker A-frame? The Hititboard can fix that. Your dog doesn't like tugging? They'll love the Tug It. Can't move your A-frame around by yourself? The Move It can. Go to hititboard.com and use discount code BDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hititboard.com.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by 1TDC. Does your dog have really bad breath? That can be a sign of poor oral health. 1TDC can help. 1-tetradecanol complex is a blend of unique fatty acid oils that can improve your dog's periodontal health. All of our listeners will automatically qualify for a great 1TDC special offer by purchasing online at BDA1TDC.com. That's BDA, the number 1, TDC.com. 1TDC promotes a healthy inflammatory response from head to tail. All right, today we are going to talk about thinking versus action. So right now, both Jennifer and I are working with some young dogs, and because of that, we are teaching lots of new behaviors. And in our training, we are reminded about this idea that dogs are sometimes in a thinking state and sometimes in a little bit more of an action-oriented state. And with these new behaviors, we're seeing this especially when you shape a behavior. I think shaping behavior using a clicker and a treat, it really kind of promotes that thinking response. The dog has to figure out what you want. And right now I'm doing, for instance, some running contacts training. I've got a mat and I am teaching the dog to run, to not even to run, really just to walk over this mat and to kind of purposely hit it. And I'm doing that with a clicker. I'm doing that with tossed treats, which for this particular dog are, pretty good, but she'd much rather have a toy. And I'm reminded as I try to add speed, start running, and especially add a toy, how different of a state the dog is in when they are thinking and when they're in an action state. And I wanted to talk about this on this podcast because I think for a lot of people, it can be a surprise when they teach a behavior in a very thinking sort of way to their dog. And then when they put their dog in a situation where the dog is a little bit more aroused, has more speed, has more drive, it's like the dog doesn't know what they're talking about anymore. And depending on the dog, this can be pretty drastic. It can be like literally the dog looks at you like they have no clue as soon as you bring out the toy when they had the behavior absolutely perfect when you were using food.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a lot of the same thing with High Five in my current training, things that I want her to be a little bit more thoughtful with, things that might be more impulse control related, just working on her stillness, her sits and her downs. But then also simultaneously training things like restrained recalls, trying to build some speeds, trying to build some drive, really, chasing after me. And it is that balance of, okay, what is the mindset that I want for this skill? And then how am I going to adapt my training to try to get that mindset, but not ending there. And I think that's what a lot of people do. They go, oh, okay, I want my dog to really be thoughtful on this jumping effort. I'm going to use food. And then they'll go out to a trial where the dog is super stimulated or part of a relay or something like that. And then the dog hasn't learned to cope with all the action element. So I 100% agree that kind of that transition you see of, okay, I started teaching it in a more thoughtful thinking manner and working on that transition of getting to more action. And I think it's important for people to really first identify, well, what behaviors do I want to be thoughtfulness? What behaviors do I want to be action related? And how am I going to help control the behavior for my dog? And I think you hit the nail on the head with one of my big key things is when I want that thoughtfulness, I tend to be more on the food, using treats and using food reinforcers, getting my dog to be a bit more thoughtful. And then when I want my dog to really run and have that action and do that restrained recalls, switching over to the toys. But it can't end there. It's making, that transition of, okay, once my dog does learn that thoughtful behavior, can I eventually get them to perform that behavior and give me that criteria with the toy, like you're experiencing on the running context.
Exactly. And I think it really jumped out at me because Esteban is also doing some running contacts training with his dog, but she's further along in the process. I haven't been involved in the whole thing. And I know from watching her, he's using a toy that when he tries to send her to a target mat from a little bit of a distance, she will often very enthusiastically run at that target, turn, with the perfect kind of like pounce push off, except for that she's not on the contact. She's like 1 foot ahead. She pulls up short because she wants to come back to the toy so very bad. And then she'll go back and, when she realizes she hasn't done the correct behavior, she'll frantically go back and pounce on the mat, maybe one paw, and then she'll finally go, fine, I'll go all the way over there, and she'll do 2 paws. And at the same time, I was doing basically the same exercise with this young border collie that I'm working with, but I was doing it with food. And she was just, she was just so brilliant. She was going all the way across the room and she was hitting the mat perfectly and coming right back. And she wasn't super slow. She wasn't completely without any drive, but she was going all the way there, coming all the way back, going all the way there, going all the way back. And then I brought out a toy and suddenly she looked exactly like Miria. She just turned into this little pouncy, machine where she just launched herself with a ton of drive toward the contact, but she didn't quite get there and then immediately came running back trying to get her toy. She gave me that, is this enough kind of behavior instead of doing the full learned behavior. And so I think that it can be discouraging for people. And I wanted to give people some tips too on how you can bridge the gap a little bit, because there are ways that you can make food a little bit more exciting, and there are ways that you can make toys a little less exciting. So I think the food one is one that people don't recognize enough or don't use enough. And what I mean by that is you can make food a little bit of an action behavior by tossing it, by basically making the dog chase down the treat. And we learned this long ago from Schutzen trainers. They call it creating an event out of giving the treat. So they make, even when they are handing their dog a treat, they make the dog basically work for it a little bit to kind of chase it a little bit. And so when I was doing this back and forth mat work, I would start off by just clicking and kind of barely, tossing the treat just a couple of inches so that she was basically right there. And she just grabbed the treat, turned around, gave me another behavior. But as I was trying to increase her speed and her distance and get a little bit more oomph out of her, I would start tossing the treat 3 or 4 feet in front of her. And so that she was actually chasing that treat and then eating the treat, which became a little bit more action-oriented thing, got a little bit more speed out of her, got her a little bit more excited about the process. And then in the reverse, if you need to bring down the level of your toy, you don't always have to throw the toy. You don't have to have them chase the toy. Like that chase is what brings out that chase and that drive. So you can, very gently, kind of just drop the toy in front of them rather than having them chase it, and then work up to where you are basically clicking and throwing a toy. They're grabbing it, you're getting it, and you're throwing the toy on the other end. So I think there can be more gradations in your training than just I'm using treats or I'm using toys. You can make the treats more exciting. You can make the toys less exciting. You can add your motion. You can subtract your motion. You can add distance so that they are coming at a skill or an obstacle or a jump with more or less speed. These are all things that we can do to manipulate that.
I think another thing that handlers can do, trainers can do to try to kind of balance out the value of the food and the toys, not only make the food more exciting and potentially use the toy in a way that's a little less exciting, but teach the dog that there are rules with the two of them as well. I think a lot of people, when they pull out a toy, it's this kind of no rules thing. There's no marker, there's no cue that gives them permission to use the toy. They don't work any impulse control around it. They don't do their start line stays. They don't do crate games with the toy in front of them, so that they pull out the toy and you're getting this huge jump between a really thoughtful dog with food and then a wild, crazy dog with toys. And I know for my dogs that there's still rules and there's still that impulse control put on them. And it's more of a gradual progression from that really thoughtfulness of minimal motion with the food to more motion and then over to the toys and then a lot of that dragging and chase that you mentioned. So I think it's important for people to also understand that if you have a dog that is going over the top with a toy, make sure you step away from your agility training and that you have a little bit of control there. If you, away from agility, don't have any level of impulse control with the toy and the dog just goes absolutely nuts, then yes, you're going to have trouble when using the toy for weave pull training or for teaching something that requires more thoughtfulness. So I think a big thing there is, just make sure you work on that element. And I also know that for those people that go, okay, well, my dog's not that interested in a toy. I'm not dealing with that issue. That's okay too. One of the mistakes that I think I see a fair amount is the agility community has gotten caught up on this toys. You have to have toys. You got to get toys. You got to tug. You got to make sure your puppy plays with toys. You have to do this. I mean, think of all the variations of toys or the instructors that work on that. It's okay if your dog doesn't love a toy. Is it helpful if they do? Absolutely. But, use the food. If you want a more, thoughtful training process, use the food. It's okay. I know there's, a lot of people, you have to use toys for weave pull training. It's not the end of the world if you use treats for weave pull training. If that's what gets your dog thinking, if that's what gets them offering, it gets them problem solving, that's okay too. We want that thoughtfulness initially in the training.
And I think there are dogs that would become unfocused and not very thoughtful in the presence of food, especially depending on the food. There are dogs that you get out the food. Actually, lately, Esteban has told me, I didn't even realize I was doing it. I fed my dogs because it was their food time and he hadn't worked Gitchy yet. But as soon as I started feeding my dogs, she was in her crate, ready to have her bowl, and he couldn't even walk around the block. She wanted to come back to the house and get dinner time. She was so conditioned to eating at the same time as the other dogs. So, there are dogs that might have trouble in the presence of food, and you need to recognize that as well. And you can use different levels of food to kind of create that same effect. I mean, even with my dogs that are more thoughtful with food, I definitely get a different response when I use kibble versus Zooks, so you can elicit those different responses with kind of different levels of food. And like I said, if you have a real chow hound and they don't use treats at all, then yeah, maybe your highest drive reward is thrown steak. You take the best food and you make it move and make them chase it down and things like that. So the other thing that I wanted to have people recognize is that there is a lot of value to having your dog work through skills both in a thoughtful way and in an action-oriented way. And so I think sometimes people feel like they are losing time or it is a waste to teach their dog something in a thoughtful way and then have to also basically kind of reteach them the same action in a drivey, action-oriented way. But I think that the two really work together, and we need to kind of have both pieces of the puzzle to have a dog that can really, we don't want a dog that runs a course overly thoughtful. And I'm sure we can all think of dogs like that they don't have the speed. They may be perfect. They may never put a paw out of place, but they don't look like they're putting in their fastest effort. They're more concerned about thinking through the process. It's kind of like if you were dancing and you're still in that mode of thinking left, right, you wouldn't be as smooth or as fluid. I know a great example. Have you tried to floss yet, Jennifer?
No, I have not.
The dance, the floss dance?
Took me yes, I do. I was like, my teeth? But yes, I know what you mean.
Yes. So there's this new dance craze. It's not that new at this point, but there's this dance called the floss, and it takes a lot of kind of coordination to do it. And when you first do it, you kind of have to think about my hips go this way and my arms go this way, and then my hips go this way and my arms go that way. And you're thinking really hard about it, and you cannot do it fast. which is kind of how it's supposed to be done. That's the cool thing about it, right? And then you kind of have to build up that speed and then get that routine going. And I think for our dogs, it can be like that as well. We don't want to stay at the thinking phase forever. But if we go straight to action, we often have a dog that doesn't fully understand what they're doing. An example might be jumping, right? Like I think all of the thoughtful exercises that we do around jumping help the dogs, first of all, to build muscle that they need to appropriately jump. And then second of all, to understand how to use their body parts to effectively jump. And so if we kind of don't do any of the thoughtfulness, we can have a sloppy jumper who gets over the bars, but maybe not the most efficient way, maybe knocks some bars, things like that. But we also don't want to stay at that thinking phase and lose the drive. So we really want to teach our dogs to do everything almost in both ways.
Yeah, I just think back to the kind of classic phrase, you got to walk before you can run. And I think some people just jump into the speed element, and it is a time sport. Speed is important to us. I think we got to make sure not to lose that, but you need to be able to walk before you can run. You need to be able to think and understand what you're doing before you can just go out there and do it. One of my big examples is I remember taking typing classes in school. And, you're learning to type and you're sitting there like, A, where's the A? Okay, boom, put my finger there. Where's the T? Now I can type and have a conversation with somebody at the same time. Like I can type out a message and look at somebody and be talking to them because it's just moved into that subconscious action phase. But it doesn't start like that. It starts very thoughtful. If somebody just put me down in front of a keyboard and said, okay, I want you to type this out at X minutes, X words per minute and have this conversation, there's no way. And I think we have to remember that when teaching things, we got to teach understanding and that thoughtfulness, then almost like you said, relearn it, transition to that speed phase. And both elements of that are very important. We don't want to get stuck at any one phase for too long. But also keeping in mind, the dogs are going to have a preference for one versus the other. We're talking a lot here about the training element of what we as trainers try to encourage. We try to encourage a thoughtfulness by doing XYZ or encourage speed. But we also have dogs that naturally are going to have a tendency to be one way or another. And for me, and if anybody knows, my two dogs, Swift and Lucky, they're only a couple months apart in age. And I would consider them very, very opposite ends of the spectrum on things. Lucky is think. I want to think. I want to know what I'm doing. I want to understand. I want to get it right. And then once I understand it, I will go fast. Swift's all about the action. Do it now. Do it now. Okay, do it now. Wait, was that right? And he's all about the action. And for him, I have to do a lot to help him be thoughtful, to make him slow down. And he will. And I've worked hard to help get him in that state. But it's not just about, what we do as trainers. While that is very helpful, we also do got to understand that our dogs will have tendencies. Your guys' dogs will have a tendency to go one way or another. Swift and Lucky, same breed, couple months apart in age, same jump height, and two very different dogs. And I got to keep that in mind when I train them. A lot of toys and driving and encouragement for Lucky. After he understands his job, he's willing to give me that. And Swift, I try to bring down a notch. I try to get him to think a little bit. Once he understands it, then I can let him go back to that kind of running state that he naturally wants to be in.
Perfect. All right. So that's it for this week's podcast. I really hope that's helpful, especially for people who may be new to the sport and it may surprise them when they try to go and teach a skill, and when they add some action, their behavior falls apart. And I want them to know that that's normal and give you some tips on how you can address that in your training. We'd like to thank our sponsors, hititboard.com, 1TDC, and NTI Global. In-stock inventory. NTI Global offers standard color and size tunnels that are ready to ship in 3 business days. Visit shop.ntiglobal.com for the widest selection of dog agility tunnels for both competition and backyard training. Known for free shipping, more options, high-quality products, and low prices, NTI Global has got you covered. They also offer Tamer and Anchor weight bags along with a full line of accessories and agility storage solutions. Need your agility gear in a hurry? Order now. Get it now. New selections and stock levels are updated regularly. Use promo code NTI SHIPSINSTOCK19 for 5% savings off today. Promo code good through March 31st, 2019. Happy training!